Well, 7 years ago I was living in Berlin researching my first book, Surviving Hitler's War, which was about how the Second World War invaded the lives of German families and how the relationships between husbands and wives and parents and children were affected by the Second World War. And I spent months reading through letters, particularly between husbands and wives. And the archivist who day in, day out provided me with these letters was from East Germany. And when I came to the end of my research at the archives, we went out for a drink. And I wanted to say thank you to him. And I was living in this sort of trendy-ish part of East Berlin, or the former East Berlin. But when we were walking through the neighborhood, he was sort of saying how much he disliked the way it had become so schickimicki, was the word that he used, fancy pants, I suppose, that it had become really westernized. And so this was kind of how, I guess, the former East was becoming colonized by Westerners, by foreigners, and how it was no longer affordable and no longer authentic, sort of as it had been in the GDR. And I suppose so that got us talking about the huge change that East Germans had experienced after the wall fell. I'd always had a long-term interest in East Germany and the Berlin Wall right from when I did German A-level a long time ago. But talking to this East German archivist, that really got me thinking, and I thought that's a project I'd like to write about. The book's about how life changed for East Germans once the Berlin Wall fell. And to understand why that's an interesting change, I think you have to go back to the end of the Second World War, where Germany's divided into two countries. For 40 years, in fact, and then for 28 years, the Berlin Wall's that physical barrier. And then during that period of division, East and West evolve into very different societies. Communism in the East, capitalism in the West. And then when the wall comes crashing down, East Germany is effectively abolished in the reunification process and rolled into West Germany. And so that's a massive change for East Germans. And the book is trying to answer really two questions. So kind of, what was it like growing up in a country that disappeared? What was it like swapping communism for capitalism? Well, I wanted to talk to East Germans about what life was like before and after the wall fell. So I thought, what better thing to do than to speak to the East Germans themselves in oral history interviews. So I wrote to all the big museums in Germany about the Cold War, about the Berlin Wall. I put leaflets through people's letterboxes asking for help. I pinned up posters on supermarket notice boards in the former East, and finally found a group of people who were willing to talk to me. And then I had great fun. I was sort of sitting in cafes or going into people's homes and hearing their stories, and it took me to some pretty ludicrous scenarios. In one case, the lady who I was visiting insisted that I put on a pair of slippers, house slippers, when I arrived. And I was so engrossed at the end of our conversation, kind of, I guess, caught up in her story, that I forgot to take them off, and I was halfway down the street before I realised that I was still wearing them and had to go back. And in another scenario, I got completely lost in Dresden, got in a strange man's car. He took me to the door of this block of flats, and I raced up, taking the stairs 2 by 2, rapped on the door, breathless and not knowing what I was going to find. And then this man with waist-length hair answered the door. He is the subject of chapter 7 of the book. So I had really very interesting experiences collecting all these stories, and then I tried to choose 8 contrasting experiences to show how differently the collapse of communism was felt in individual lives. I aimed to interview people who were born after 1961, when the Berlin Wall went up, so that they knew nothing other than growing up under communism. So the change would be, in a way, most stark for them because they had nothing to compare it to.